hosted by Andy Moss. Andy has been in the staffing industry for over 25 years, first as a recruiter, then eventually an account manager and business owner. This is the podcast where we sit down with fellow staffing owners to get the real stories of the successes, the failures, and the lessons learned along the way.
Welcome back to Staffing Stories. I'm your host, Andy Moss, and I am in my basement recording studio, and glad to have you guys back on as listeners. I've got a special guest this week, Mr. Nelson Leiser, and Blue Green Vacations, and he's a friend of mine in the recruiting industry, and I love what he does from a recruiting aspect, and I invited him to be on the show, so welcome to the hot seat.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate the invite. We'll have a lot of fun.
Well, introduce yourself to our listeners and our watching audience, and just get kind of bring them up to date where who you are.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Nelson Leiser. I was raised in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, so I'm a hillbilly, I think. Been in recruiting for almost 26 years, 9 years in the agency world, and the last 15 in corporate.
Okay, now that's one thing I wanted to talk about is some of our recruiters that listen to this and, makes the transition from like a third party agency to a corporate side. How did that happen for you?
Yeah. So actually every role I've landed, 8 different companies. So the ones prior to getting in recruiting, and then every recruiting role I've had has always been landed through networking.
Yeah.
It's always the harder way to get there, but it's a little more fun, and it sometimes opens up opportunities you wouldn't obviously see in other spaces. So a lady that I worked with in the agency world had moved to Wyndham Vacation Ownership, one of our competitors, and it was my first stint in this industry. And she was a sales recruiter for them for a summer back in 2006, and eventually called me and said, "Hey, apply to be my boss." Which is not what ended up happening, but that's the story, and that was my intro into the corporate space. It was sales recruiting with Wyndham for almost 10 years.
So when you talk about networking, I look at recruiting because that's what I love to do. Is man, everybody you talk to, you never know where it circles back around.
100%. Yeah.
So kind of explain if you have a philosophy around that. Because you do it so well. We're trying to get to the secret sauce, but I enjoy watching it.
Yeah, listen, I appreciate that. It's for those that know me really well, it's really not a secret, and it's also not a technique. One of my fraternity brothers, when I first got out of college, gave me a Zig Ziglar book. Don't ask me which one, because there's zero chance I would remember. But the one thing I do remember is a quote, and it was, "You can have everything in life you want if you'll just help enough other people get what they want." I probably have butchered it. It's the only quote I really ever quote, and I probably missed a word or two. But as soon as I read it, I thought, man, I had spent my life at that point in middle and high school and college really trying to help others get out of their own way and be successful in whatever they were doing. So, it resonated. I was in outside sales for several years before I got into a recruiting space. And I think the reason I've never left recruitment is because of that quote and that way to kind of live life. So I say that to say this, Andy, I don't really look at a conversation as necessarily what am I going to get? It's more of the standpoint of I'm just curious about people.
Yep.
If I can help make connections, gosh, you've been in the game a long time too, right? It doesn't take very long to realize that if you'll just be a giver, you will get so much more than you could ever possibly give away.
Well, anybody we touch as a recruiter, we're not going to be able to place everybody we talk to.
Oh, yeah, sure.
But you definitely want them to walk away from that experience with you, either via phone, text, or Zoom nowadays. Think like, I really like that guy. He helped me get through some thoughts. Sure. And I've lived by those same principles of, I may or may not work to place you, but you will leave my relationship better than you came in. And some of it's just mental. Some people have gone through like downsizing or, changing a career, and they just need someone to talk to. And being in it as much as we are, and we see the environment a little bit different. So we try to help them through that. And it's almost like therapeutic.
Oh, 100%. Listen, one of the most challenging things for individuals can be interviewing. Now, there are those that maybe enjoy it. I love to interview people, but I also love to interview. I know that's probably not normal. Yeah. I've been in sales recruiting longer than I've done anything, and I know some super talented salespeople that cannot stand being interviewed. I won't mention their names, right? And you'd think if any group would love it, it'd be that group, but not necessarily. So I say that to say it's a challenging space. And on the hiring manager side, it's a super critical decision, probably one of the most important they'll make. And there are so few hiring managers that really are super skilled at interviewing.
Yeah. So how do you, with my third party, with my staffing company, our client managers and working with them, but you have client managers also internally. Is there a big difference?
Sure. Yeah. So this is the part that you may need to edit out. I'm kidding. I mean, this is the reality for, I think, most any corporation. The agency side, for me, for the most part, you are working with super talented hiring managers, especially on the perm side, right? Because for them to pay the permanent placement fee, they had to have some kind of internal equity at the company that would allow the company to say, sure, it's okay to spend 12, 15, 20, 30 grand on this hire, right? So you're working with the A players. Well, on the corporate side, there's all different levels of hiring managers. That's probably the nicest way I could say it. But I tell you this, we service all of them, all the levels. So it can be a little different, right? You don't get to fire the client, so to speak, if you're on the corporate side.
We have to help along. Is like I always, with some of my managers, I have to reiterate is you are recruiting this individual to your company. So don't miss the mark of, you want to ask questions, but you also want to put a good light in, like, do I want to work for this person or with this person? And sometimes my managers tend to forget that. And I have to remind them, is like, look, you can help recruit as much as I can, I can bring them to the table, but you've got to sell them on your organization and why you should come work for us. And I distinctly remember a couple conversations with one client, like, well, that's not my job. I was like, yes, it is.
Sure.
No one's going to want to go work for somebody that just doesn't, paint that good picture.
Oh yeah, 1,000%. Right. And at the end of the day, if you're the hiring manager, I'm coming to work for you. Correct. Right. I'm looking at you as being a potential mentor, and I need you to give me a realistic job preview that shows all sides, but I also need to see some enthusiasm. So if you lack the ability to sell it, that could kill the deal for sure.
And if you have the capability of sitting on a phone interview or sitting behind the scenes of a Zoom interview, you will learn so much about your client and the job opportunity you're recruiting for by just listening. Yeah, and trust me, it'll probably be totally different than what they gave you on paper.
Yep.
and managers think different. Like, this maybe a mid-level manager was not part of the job description, but he's going to say, this is what you're going to be doing. It's probably different.
Right. Oh, sure. Yeah. Agree.
One thing about that I love to see from you is you use social media very well. Do you have a thought about the tools you use or like a method?
Sure. So you want the real thought, right? I'm still trying to figure it out. There's the real answer.
We all are.
It was several years ago that, and probably not soon enough in all reality, but at least I started to realize that video was going to be an important thing. And, I'll be 54 the day after Christmas. So I say that to say I didn't grow up with a cell phone. In fact, I remember debating even bothering, would I make that investment? And the younger crowd is laughing right now. And I get it. But so I say that to say it was quite terrifying to record myself at first. So if you're resistant to that, I get it. Just do it anyway. I'm not saying my videos are worth listening to now, but they're better than they were. So hopefully they get a little better. And I think what started me on the journey was really, I'll go back to the quote. I just wanted to see, could I start to share a little bit more about what I've learned? I've been blessed to have a lot of great mentors. So back after I had hit, or right as I was about to hit the 20-year mark in recruitment, I thought I'll just develop this little series and just start to share some things from a candidate's perspective, a hiring manager's perspective, and then a recruiter's perspective. And frankly, that was the game plan, right? Was just to start to share those stories and see what would happen. And as I went down that journey, I think that helped me learn a ton. I probably won't use the right words. So if you ask technical terms, I'm not sure I know them at this point, right? I know just enough to be dangerous. And then I think there was a massive shift in the social space on LinkedIn in particular during the pandemic. You started to see these influencers arise that were just incredible at the platform.
Yep.
And to be real, I'm following as many of them that I really connect with and can learn from. And I think I'm kind of on their coattails. Now, a lot of them are not necessarily in the recruiting space. There are some that are, and certainly I'm following several that have a national audience that are doing it really well. I'm not trying to duplicate what they do because I can't be them. And to be fair, they can't be me. I'm not saying they'd want to be, but
Well, I think a lot of people are using, they're trying to figure out, okay, is TikTok good for recruiting? Or,
sure.
Things like that. And, at my age of 50, I'm not, into TikToks and stuff like that. But this younger generation is, into that 1 minute long, which is some beauty into that.
Sure.
But I just tackling some of these platforms these days, and, where is it meaningful to do Facebook? Where is it meaningful to do TikTok versus LinkedIn?
Sure.
I think that's the best set apart any recruiter could do, is what sets you apart in those fields.
Sure. And I think, you've got to figure out in the world you're working in. So in our industry in particular, our crowd that we hire for sales and marketing roles within this industry live on Facebook. And it's not to say that they're not in other areas, but in a much greater way, they're on Facebook. So I say that to say, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and I may connect with some leaders in that space for this particular industry. For a majority, and I'm talking more site leaders that would be over a whole operation, a state, a region, that kind of thing. The sales managers and the staff and associate level, they're really on Facebook.
Yeah.
So most of what you see me do really isn't for the job, if that makes sense. So you've got to kind of know where your crowd is and hire experts to work the other pieces. We certainly have some folks that are doing that for this particular company, but I'm not the guy that's going to figure out Instagram or Twitter, X, whatever it's called today, and TikTok and all that stuff.
So what would you tell the younger Nelson to encourage him back in the day? Like, what would you say to yourself if you had to go back 22 years and say, I wish I'd known this?
I got really lucky, and I was talking with a couple of UT students last week for some classes. They'd reached out to just kind of do an interview and ask some questions, and one asked a similar question. And I got really lucky figuring out early on in my career that the manager that I'd go to work for, if it was going to really work well for both sides and be a true win-win, that person would be a mentor for me. Now, not necessarily mentor all areas, but at least be a mentor. So when I look back, when things didn't go as well, because they didn't all go well, not every job move went well, it's when I lost track of that and didn't, I guess, put on the right candidate shoes, if you will, and probe enough as the job seeker to figure out, beyond this initial connection with this individual, would they be a good mentor? Or philosophically, did they even agree with that? I did have a leader in my past that I felt like, from an interview perspective, we connected extremely well. However, philosophically, that individual believed that a direct supervisor could not mentor you. Man, had I known that, I wouldn't have accepted the job.
So in that same, where do you look back in your career, have made a mistake or something you may regret you learned from, and it may be what you just said, but I'm curious if there was a moment or a issue that you can kind of pinpoint, like, I really screwed up here, but I learned from it.
Yeah, sure. I've been married almost 26 years. No, I've been married a little over 26 years. Excuse me. I've been in recruiting almost 26. So when I made mistakes, it's when I didn't listen to my wife, who was a school teacher and has been a stay-at-home mom ever since. And she just had an uneasy feeling about the job move. So I need to give credit there for whatever reason. And I thought, she doesn't necessarily know the business world. This is young Nelson.
Yeah.
Almost 54-year-old Nelson goes, man, if she's not in, I'm out. It didn't
Yeah.
you can't articulate why. That's okay, right?
Yeah.
And I say that it's important to really look at your centers of influence. And for me, certainly Jeannie's a huge, huge part of that. And take their wisdom. And for all of us, it could be coworkers, it could be former mentors, those kinds of things. So I say there have been some job moves that one in particular she was unsettled about. And hey, it didn't work out, right? Hey, but it checked all the boxes.
Yeah.
Until it didn't.
Listening to your spouse is something that my wife has a keen sense of individuals too.
Yeah.
She knows people, she'll say, that person's not going to work out. And I'm like, yeah, they will. I mean, they're perfect. They don't work out. Or
sometimes they just know.
They have this sixth sense. So I totally get you there. So when you look at our industry of recruiting, are there things that interest you and just that you see coming down the pike that's like, man, this could be a game changer?
Sure. I think, really taking the social space, artificial intelligence, and being data driven. And I'll back up, if you can kind of move all those pieces together. I haven't really been with an organization that has captured that really well. And I'll just give a super simple example. I see all the same content that job seekers and others talk about on LinkedIn right now, and the frustrations. And you don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. A corporate ATS, most of them are garbage. I hope they're not all watching, but all of them are watching your show. Years ago, when I worked at a large staffing firm, I felt like the internal database that firm had was much more intuitive and made better use of a recruiter time than anything I've ever used in the corporate space. And I think there's a couple things that come from that. It's one, in the staffing agencies, that's all you do. And so you're going to invest heavily there. Mm-hmm. On the corporate side, we're here to serve the needs of the business. And what tends to happen for most corporations is that means we're going to get what we're going to get. Oh, hey, it just came with the HRIS system. Oh, wait, that's going to be a good sign. Or, it's just not as good. So what interests me is, as corporate TA gets a bigger seat at the table and can ever convince the leadership that, hey, look, we could really move mountains if we could make better data-driven decisions. So it's all out there. We just haven't found a way to, I say most of us in the field on the corporate side haven't found a way to assess what or gain access to what we need from a tool perspective to really tell the story.
Well, that's one thing that, at 3D IQ, we're focused on that business intelligence, and the history in your ATS will tell you what's right or wrong. But you have to be able to extract it and see it.
Sure.
And I think that's a very valid point. What you're saying is investing in the right systems and equipment. But I know a lot of companies that have every piece of tool in the world, but they don't use it. They maybe use 20% of what they have. And so if you're going to invest in something, you better use it.
Hey, listen, if they have it and they don't want to use it, I would gladly take it and learn it. Just send it my way. It'll be fine.
I know, but I mean, that's something that most recruiters and salespeople have the tool at their fingertip. It's just, learning it, trying to get better at it. I think everybody will say they only use their ATS half of the capabilities it probably does.
Sure.
But
Fair point. Yeah.
those capabilities were added in there to help streamline things. So
Sure.
I know I learn new things with Bullhorn every day, and all of them are good. It's just I have to go searching sometimes.
Well, we have to get uncomfortable. And I think in order to really sustain a career, either as an agency recruiter or a corporate recruiter, the best that I've met across the country and met either online or face-to-face, virtually, however we meet in today's world, have been okay with being uncomfortable and learning and venturing out, right? I think that's probably the most exciting thing to me is this profession as a whole. If you're a lifelong learner, you'll never figure it all out. So it's exciting.
Well, if you're going to be in this business as long as we have, adapting, because there's no old school recruiting anymore, because it's all new school. So the stuff we learned 20 years ago, probably 75% of it doesn't apply today, because we're not, if you show somebody a phone book, they're like, what's that? But now we're using different things, and you have to learn. So I don't care what your age is, but you have to be willing to adopt some new techniques or skills that if you're not moving forward with your skill development, you're going to be going backwards.
1000%. Yes.
So just to kind of wrap up this is, are there, trends that you've been putting to work that, like either texting, phone calls, email, like what seems to be hitting for you when you grab talent these days, or responding to this when I do this?
Sure. Well, this is something that did work 20 years ago and still works now. It's just never going to meet every single need. And that's making sure that you're investing as a corporation in an employee referral program. It's worked every industry I've been in. Again, it doesn't land every single hire, but it has to be a healthy, it's got to be a healthy percentage. So I say that to say, when I look at the candidates that are the most likely to make it through the process, to stick with the process, to show for the first interview, show for the final, show for day one of work, and be successful. And this even goes back into healthcare, by the way. So 3 different companies, 2 different industries. It's been through referrals. So, but those programs have to be nurtured. Sometimes you've got to change it up and even change the name and rebrand and commercialize. So that's still something that continues to be a very important thing that's got to be part of the deal. On the other side, something to be transparent, that I don't have my arms around, and that's the amount of folks that, as I lead a team in the industry that I worked in for 10 years before I went to healthcare. Back in the day, it was not uncommon to have 90 to 100% of the candidates that I booked for a first interview show up. And today I'm celebrating 60%.
Yeah, I know.
So it's, it's a new grading scale. But you think about hiring manager education and expectations at that point. A 60% when we were in school wasn't a great grade. And today I'm high-fiving some people for 60%. So...
Well, it is shocking, the ghosting, the no-shows, that it's common, and and it's concerning about where our future will go, but that's for another topic and another conversation. But so I always ask my guests at the end, of the podcast, okay, if you're streaming something right now, Hulu, whatever, what's your show? What's your go-to?
Oh, wow. Maybe I shouldn't admit this online. I hand the remote to my wife, and we watch a ton of different things. I don't know the names of any of them, other than, America's Got Talent is a show we watch on a continual basis. And because we met in the college choir, we both love music. So The Voice is probably, if I had to pick one thing, it's probably The Voice.
Hey, that's not a problem. I mean, I ask this question to a lot of guests, and I get some of the greatest answers. There are some Star Wars nuts that will come out closet and say,
Oh yeah, sure.
But
I'm all into that too. Yeah,
but it's always interesting. I get a great response. But Nelson, I really appreciate you being a guest on Staffing Stories, and you do a great job. And I just keep going. But just thank you for being on the hot seat.
Yeah. Hey, thanks so much for the invite. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into the episode. Staffing Stories is brought to you by 3D-IQ. We are the future of staffing sales. Our solutions are designed to supercharge your sales and 3x placements, all without ever leaving Bullhorn. Direct market, deliver talent, and drive sales with our all-in-one tool designed for the modern recruiter. Visit 3diq.com/stories to learn more. Find Staffing Stories on LinkedIn, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts.